Greetings and welcome to Beacon Unitarian Universalist Congregation. To our members, friends, and everyone joining us in our virtual congregation on YouTube today. I'm the Reverend Robin Landerman Zucker, the minister of this congregation, and I will be hosting our virtual service today for July 5th, 2020, with our music director, Gabriel Hernandez, our pianist, Rebecca Prizznick, and Worship Associate Nancy Paxton. This congregation is spiritually open and intentionally inclusive. Whoever you are and whomever you love, you are welcome here. Our members and friends bring many interests, theologies, and viewpoints to our door. Here, you can trust that you will find a common desire for meaningful community and spiritual growth, and for relevant religious exploration in a very open, flexible container. Membership in this congregation is open to anyone who chooses to walk with us in the spirit of love and in the search for truth with commitment to justice. As I light the chalice, the symbol of our free faith, I invite you to share the words with me that you will find on your screen. We light this chalice with a flame that draws us together. With this flame, we cut through the darkness of our isolation and are warmed by the fires of our interconnection. And now Nancy has some opening words for us.
Our opening words are from Alexis de Tocqueville. America is great because she is good. I sought for the greatness and genius of America in her commodious harbors and her ample rivers, and it was not there. I sought for the greatness and genius of America in her fertile fields and boundless forests, and it was not there. I sought for the greatness and genius of America in her rich mines and her vast world commerce, and it was not there. I sought for the greatness and genius of America in her public school system and her institutions of learning, and it was not there. I sought for the greatness and genius of America in her democratic Congress and her matchless Constitution, and it was not there. Not until I went to the churches of America and heard her pulpits flame with righteousness did I understand the secret of her genius and power. America is great because America is good. And if America ever ceases to be good, America will cease to be great.
Hello, please join me in singing Come Build a Land. We'll build a land where we bind up the broken. We'll build a land where the captives go free, where the oil of gladness dissolves all mourning. Oh, we'll build a promised land that can be. Come build a land where sisters and brothers, anointed by God, may then create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing stream. We'll build a land where we bring the good tidings to all the afflicted and all those who mourn, and we'll give them garlands instead of ashes. Oh, we'll build a land where peace is born. Come build a land where sisters and brothers, anointed by God, may then create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing stream. We'll be a land building up ancient cities, raising up devastations from old, restoring ruins of generations. Oh, we'll build a land of people so bold. Come, build a land where sisters and brothers, anointed by God, may then create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing stream. Come, build a land where the mantles of praises resound from spirits once faint and once weak, where like oaks of righteousness stand her people. Oh, come build the land, my people we seek. Come build a land where sisters and brothers, anointed by God, may then create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing stream.
Please join me in reciting the mission and covenant of Beacon. The mission of Beacon Unitarian Universalist Congregation is to be a welcoming community that embraces diverse thought, belief, and builds a just and compassionate world. Love is the spirit of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve humanity and kindness. Thus do we covenant. Thank you.
Now is the time in our service when congregants are invited to share a personal joy or sorrow in the supportive fellowship of this community. I did receive a beautiful joy this week from Dan Davis, who wrote about the birth of his grandson, Elijah, and that all are well, and that he is so filled with happiness to be a grandfather. So we'll put a stone in for him and one in for Elijah and his family. We have some members of our congregation who are dealing with different medical issues and are healing up and hopefully are doing well. And we put a stone of healing in for them. For all of those who are coping with COVID-19, whether they have the disease or someone they love has it, or they're a frontline worker, they just live in the community, in the world. We're all coping with this marathon that this virus has brought. I put this stone in for all of us, that we will remain safe and move through this together, supporting each other safely and in whatever ways we can. For those who continue to show up for justice, for Black Lives Matter rallies, and other efforts to make sure that we continue to work for justice in the world, including the things that I'm talking about today in the service, fair elections, voter suppression, and other electoral issues. This stone is for you. And of course, for all the joys and sorrows that remain unspoken, because they are either too tender or too private to share, let us remember that everyone is fighting their own private battle. We know not what it is, but because we're human, we know it to be true. So let us be kind, compassionate, flexible, and forgiving with one another. I invite you now to enter into a place of centering and quiet with me as we practice some intentional breathing. You're carrying your breath with you every day through every moment, and it really is portable sort of first aid, emotionally, spiritually, and psychologically, especially during this difficult time when we're all facing so many more anxieties and fears and uncertainty with COVID-19 and all of the byproducts it has brought and all of the ways the world right now feels unstable. So let's practice some breathing and feel how that supports us in every way. So I invite you to breathe in 4 beats through your nose and then let that out in a thin stream through your mouth, but have that be 5 beats or 6 beats, because research shows actually that when the exhale is longer than the inhale, it actually enhances relaxation. So let's just breathe. Close your eyes, put your feet on the floor, and cross your arms. Don't do anything else, and just breathe. As you're breathing, feel how you can create spaciousness inside of you, starting at the crown of your head and moving down through your body, just releasing and relaxing as you go along, opening up to spaciousness, the center around your heart, your gut, your throat, any of the places you hold tension or fear, and just breathe yourself into that spaciousness from your crown to your root. Just breathe. 4 beats in, 5 or 6 beats out. While you're breathing, I offer this prayer. Mysterious presence, spirit of love, spirit of life. We pause here at the turning of our week. We are joyful and we are sad. We are lonely and we are hopeful. We are anxious. We are at peace. We are lost and we are found. Mysterious presence, wherever you are or whatever you may be, take hold of us, gently hold us, and also gently shake us. Help us to honor others in the fullness of their being. Help us to hold on to what is good, to see that we can be great as individuals, a community, and a nation when we are good and true and just. Inspire us to celebrate the sacred and honorable in all of our public and private spaces, in our leaders and in ourselves. And most of all, help us to heal and create a beloved community and build a land, a global community, and a planet that we can inhabit in peace. Blessed be. Let us be silent together.
Today's reading is by Harold Pinter, a British poet born in 1930, died in 2008. The poem is called God Bless America. Here they go again, the Yanks in their armored parade, chanting their ballads of joy as they gallop across the big world, praising America's God. The gutters are clogged with the dead, the ones who couldn't join in, the others refusing to sing, the ones who are losing their voice, the ones who've forgotten the tune. The riders have whips which cut. Your head rolls into the sand. Your head is a pool in the dirt. Your head is a stain in the dust. Your eyes have gone out, and your nose sniffs only the pong of the dead. And all the air is alive with the smell of America's God.
Wake up, everybody, no more sleeping in bed. No more backwards thinking, time for thinking ahead. The world has changed so very much from what it used to be. There is so much hatred, war and poverty. Wake up, all the teachers, time to teach a new way. Maybe then they'll listen to what you have to say. 'Cause they're the ones who's coming up, and the world is in their hands. When you teach the children, teach them the very best you can. The world won't get no better if we just let it be. The world won't get no better. We gotta change it, yeah, just you and me. Wake up, all the doctors, make the sick people well. They're the ones who's suffering and who catch all the hell. But they don't have so very long before the judgment day. So won't you make them happy before they pass away? Wake up, all the builders, time to build a new land. I know we can do it if we all lend a hand. The only thing we have to do is put it in our minds. Surely things will work out, 'cause they do every time. The world won't get no better if we just let it be. Oh, the world won't get no better. We gotta change it, yeah, just you and me. Gotta change it, yeah, just you and me. We gotta change the world, just take my hand, just you and me.
My sermon today is entitled, An Atheist for President. When Dwight Eisenhower was first inaugurated in 1953, somebody thought at the last moment that a gigantic inaugural parade, which celebrated almost everything from motherhood to the success of the GOP, should also celebrate God. A contrivance called God's Float was rushed to completion, But there was considerable embarrassment because of the shortage of appropriate materials. The float couldn't look Catholic or Protestant or Jewish. Muslim wasn't even on the radar screen back then. Buddhist, forget about it. It would have to be given some dignified place of honor in the parade, but where? Finally, it was put first, and at the heart of this display was placed a rather innocuous and not quite denominational building surrounded with competing mottos: "In God we trust" on one side and "Freedom to worship" on the other. Folks, there ends an especially bizarre chapter in the history of official godliness in American government. In fact, the McCarthy-inflected 1950s was a particularly busy time for official godliness. The phrase "under God" was added to the Pledge of Allegiance, which in and of itself has an interesting and odd history. "In God we trust" was put on the back of our currency, and Ohio adopted the state motto, later overturned, "With God, all things are possible." Of course, there isn't supposed to be any official godliness at all in the good old US of A, at least according to our Constitution, a secular document which is too often misapplied despite its relative clarity. It begins, "We the people," and has virtually no mention of God or Christianity whatsoever. Its only references to religion are exclusionary, such as, "No religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust," and the famed First Amendment, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof." Of all the misguided claims made about the First Amendment, perhaps none is more dangerous and insipid than those of TV evangelists cum politicos and alt-right bloggers and pundits who spew remarks like, "The Constitution guarantees freedom of religion, not freedom from religion." Wrong. This has been the stock phrase of the religious right for decades, recited frequently by their faithful bullies. Despite what these shock jocks espouse, or the repeated blunder that our founders did not believe in the separation of church and state, we are not, nor have we ever been, nor are we meant to be a theocracy, a government based on a theological framework. Yes, many of the folks who settled America in the early 1600s were Puritans who were escaping what they called the priestcraft and persecution in Europe for their beliefs. They were devout Christians who saw themselves as participants in divine history. They literally saw themselves as characters in a biblical continuum, wandering in the wilderness before arriving on these shores. America was their promised land, their new Jerusalem. They were religious with a capital R. There's no denying that. But our founding fathers, at work on a burgeoning nation in the late 1700s, they had other ideas. They recognized and they guaranteed freedom of religion, including the possibility of freedom from religion. This should not be a matter of debate or opinion. It's there in writing. If an American can believe freely, then one can choose not to believe at all, to be, dare I say it, an atheist, or more gently, a humanist. Thomas Jefferson clearly recognized this. When legislators in Virginia debated his landmark statute for religious freedom in 1786, efforts were made to limit religious liberty to Christians alone. In other words, Virginians were free to profess any religion they wanted as long as it was a Christian one. This proposal was ultimately rejected, and Jefferson's bill passed in its original form. Years later, Jefferson rejoiced in the fact that his legislation protected, in his words, quote, the Jew and the Gentile, the Christian and Mohammedan, the Hindu and the infidel of every denomination. Disclaimer added by me, as long as they were white and not enslaved. But this foundational version of religious freedom is still a hot potato in national politics. And it is still a bit of a stretch to imagine a vowed atheist getting past the gates at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Although the numbers are bending increasingly in favor of non-believers, with a surprising 54% claiming in 2012 that they would vote for a qualified atheist or humanist for president. Now, to balance that, a 2016 Pew survey showed that 51% would be less likely to elect a candidate who did not believe in God, presumably the personal God of the Judeo-Christian tradition. Herb Silverman, who calls himself the unflappable atheist and was the founder of the Secular Coalition of America, he experienced this challenge himself. In 1990, he ran for the governor of South Carolina, of all places, where an old law banned atheists like him from holding office. Silverman lost by a landslide, though his candidacy did lead to the repeal of that law to the state Supreme Court because it defied the Constitution. Silverman, who tells the story of his run for office in his wryly titled book, Candidate Without a Prayer, says that to push their approval numbers higher, more atheists need to come out, just as gay and lesbians have. He says, I think prejudices will always be with us, so I am not optimistic enough to think atheist approval ratings will skyrocket or be near unanimous. But I think the more role models we have, the better things can be. And I couldn't agree with him more. There are some encouraging trends afoot. In the current Congress, 18 members refused to divulge their religious affiliations, and Jared Huffman, Democrat from California, he openly declared himself a humanist. Two California Democrats, Representatives Amy Barra and Judy Chu, they checked Unitarian Universalist as their denominations. UU Walt Minnick of Idaho, he served from 2009 to 2011. Now, a few short years ago, Arizona Democratic Rep. Kristen Sinema admitted to being unaffiliated, which Pew defines as people who are atheist, agnostic, who describe their religion as nothing in particular, or nones, N-O-N-E-S. That means only 0.2% of Congress is unaffiliated or nones, compared with 23% of the US adult population as a whole. But what's interesting is that group is the fastest growing than any religious group in America. And that 23% matches exactly the percentage of evangelicals and the percentage of Catholics in the US today. Fascinating. Even so, nearly 91% of congressional members claim to be Christian, compared with 71% of US adults overall. That is a hefty number, and as we see, it profoundly affects the passage of legislation. If we go back once again to 1958, the heyday of official godliness, we learned from a Gallup poll that 4 out of 5 voters in America would have refused to vote for an avowed atheist or a none for higher elected office of any kind. Of course, the lowly status of atheism was partly due to its linkage with communism. Communists are atheists, communists are America's #1 enemy, ergo, atheists are also America's #1 enemy. So much for moral complexity or critical thinking or religious freedom. The religious lives of our presidents has always been a source of innuendo and gossip. And the religions, they've covered the gamut. Washington was an Anglican, Cleveland was a Presbyterian, McKinley was a Methodist, Hoover was a Quaker, Harding a Baptist, Kennedy famously a Catholic. Our 45th president says he's a big religion guy and a Presbyterian. Does he go to church on Sunday? No. His prosperity gospel ringmaster, Paula White, makes White House house calls, saying he's the chosen one. Astonishingly, at least to me, 21% agree that Trump is anointed by God. 80% of evangelicals voted for him, despite his blatant sins, and 72% of evangelicals still approve of him. That is a 6% drop from 2016. Trump claimed in a recent interview that the Bible is his second favorite book after The Art of the Deal, and that his favorite scripture passage is, and I quote, the one about the 2 Corinthians. Yet, as we've recently witnessed for Trump, the Bible is primarily a prop to hold aloft awkwardly after tear gassing his own citizens in Lafayette Square. And holding up that Bible was clearly a dog whistle, since for decades, centuries really, the Bible has been used as a defense for white supremacy and slavery. And the stunt, it was roundly condemned by important religious figures in our country and mainline clergy. And on this very 4th of July weekend, he intends to host, during a deadly pandemic, no less, a fireworks celebration of white-centered freedom on Native American sacred ground at Mount Rushmore. The Sioux are not happy about that. They say he was not invited and that this celebration of America is not welcome. Based on the evidence, our president is essentially a-religious and without real beliefs or a moral center. But this has not always been the case with the presidency. Did you know that 4 presidents were Unitarians? John Adams, John Quincy Adams, Fillmore, and Taft. Jefferson attested privately and in many writings to Unitarian leanings. He said, in fact, back in the late 1700s, that he thought in 100 years everybody would be Unitarian because it made sense to him. And 4 presidents, they didn't list any church membership at all. Now, the surprise among those who didn't list, who were circumspect, is no less an icon than Abraham Lincoln. The suspicion about Abe's atheism was provocative, so provocative that in 1893, a prominent editor published a 360-page report entitled, "Abraham Lincoln, Was He a Christian?" Given his legacy, does it really matter? Adlai Stevenson, a Unitarian presidential candidate in both 1952 and 1956, labored under a similar suspicion. So much so that in 1955, he calmly joined the Presbyterian Church while retaining his Unitarian membership. 60 years later, candidates continue to cloak their atheism or their humanism in order to get elected, or to even show up on people's radar screens. Case in point, Representative Barney Frank, Democrat of Massachusetts. He spent 16 terms in Congress and came out as a gay man in 1987, yet waited until after he retired in 2013 to reveal his atheism. He explained it by saying, atheists sounded aggressive and repudiating to people. Well, maybe he could have done something to correct that view. As it stands, there is very little balance in the religious thrust of policymaking in Congress. It wasn't until 2007 that Representative Peter Stark, also Democrat of California, became the highest ranking official, public official, to ever admit to being an atheist, although he described himself as a Unitarian who doesn't believe in a supreme being. And that might be a way that many of us would describe ourselves. And good on you, Pete. You brought it out there in the light of day. I can imagine this confused some people, though, and it may be helpful to define our terms a little more clearly. So an atheist is someone who doesn't believe in a transcendent deity, a person who is not a theist. Some humanists are atheists and some are not. An agnostic is one who holds that it's impossible to know anything definitive about God and thus remains a seeker, uncertain. Some UUs are agnostic and some are not. Our fourth principle, the free and responsible search for truth and meaning, really supports an agnostic perspective. I presume a number of you would place yourself in these different categories. Some UUs are theists, even if they're sort of mild theists who believe in a personal God, and that's fine too. I am not casting a vote for one or the other. But an infidel, the most pejorative term, is one who is an unbeliever, one who is actually against God. Unfortunately, in the warped and very simplistic world of the religious right, not only atheists and agnostics and UUs by association are branded as infidels, but so is anyone who doesn't subscribe to a particular narrow brand of conservative Christianity. So much for Jefferson's fortitude in 1786. And we cannot overlook the ignorance of a shockingly high percentage of Americans who get their facts or their alternative facts or their conspiracy theories from social media, shock radio, conspiracy sites, and outlets like QAnon, and sincerely believe that President Barack Obama was really a Muslim, even though he is a bona fide member of the United Church of Christ and was exposed to Unitarian Universalism as a child too. If we look, and they'll be coming out again, at the propaganda-filled voter guides that the conservative Christian lobby is so skilled at distributing illegally in some cases, we discovered that the litmus test is not whether a candidate is Christian, but what kind of Christian they purport to be. Of course, as I'm saying, according to the letter of constitutional law, a candidate's religious leaning shouldn't technically be a factor. But religious views and religious perspectives, even if they're warped, and they really aren't accurate, they've been pushed increasingly center stage by evangelical and fundamentalist Christian groups who have swamped the debate and set the agenda and filled our courts with judges. They've convinced many Americans that all candidates must pass a very strict litmus test based on creed, rather than what is just or correct or humane or compassionate or inherently American. It's possible that if PACs, political action committees like Focus on the Family, were prohibited from tangling in the election process, religious leanings may recede back to a less prominent and more appropriate place. We might not even care at some point. It wouldn't matter if candidate ascribed to some mushy religiosity about a matter as seemingly small as the baking of a wedding cake for a gay couple, but rather whether their policies and platforms passed an essential litmus test of ethics, principle, and right relationship to humanity and to the planet on such important issues as reproductive justice, marriage equality, economic inequality, Black Lives Matter, global warming, gun control, and immigration reform. It appears that our Supreme Court needs to be reminded that ours is a democracy, not a theocracy. We are electing secular political leaders to run a government, not religious leaders to manage a house of worship. And we must keep at it, especially as we've seen in this past month around reproductive and LGBTQ rights. Ironically, the Anti-Defamation League, one of the largest Jewish organizations in America, has felt the need to assert that while candidates should feel comfortable talking about their faith in public, at some point, an emphasis on religion in a political campaign becomes inappropriate or even unsettling in a religiously diverse society such as ours. Jefferson would wholeheartedly agree. He originally coined the phrase separation of church and state in a carefully crafted letter to the Danbury, Connecticut Baptists in 1802. Alarmingly, that wall is still very much in danger of being breached. Consider whether we've progressed really that far from the astute observations of French philosopher Alexis de Tocqueville, whose poem we heard earlier, and who was fascinated by the interface of American culture, democracy, and religion. During his extensive travels in America in the 1830s, the same time when Unitarianism was really taking hold, he wrote these words: "Upon my arrival here, the religious aspect of the country was the first thing that struck my attention. Religion in America takes no direct part in the government of society," he said, "but nevertheless, it must be regarded as the foremost of the political institutions of that country, for they hold it to be indispensable to the maintenance of their republic institutions, and democratic ones too, I might add." Frankly, I'd feel more comfortable and more confident about our elected officials at every level if I had some assurance that they believed in a global ethic and in some basic humane principles rather than rank and file religious rhetoric, ill-defined morality, and the kind of mushy thinking that we are served up on a regular basis. As we've witnessed through history, avowed religiosity doesn't guarantee morality. In fact, according to a recent study, the ethical behavior of people who say religion is essential in their lives is often indistinguishable from the behavior of those who describe religion as less important. These findings run counterintuitive to the assumption that religious people are more ethical and more honorable than non-religious people. Yet even as fewer Americans are attending regular worship services, religious belief remains a key rubric in voting. I have nothing against the whole concept of being religious. I'm a minister, or the choice of being a Christian. In fact, I try to be, and hope you try to be, religious in a Unitarian Universalist way, and that you will use your vote. My beef is with the assumption that religious has a very narrow meaning in America, and that UUs are pegged as non-religious people simply because some of us are atheists or agnostics or humanists. But we are not infidels. Unitarian Universalism is a religion rich in history and tradition. Remember what I said, 4 presidents were Unitarians. However, since our religion is no longer based on a creed, the litmus test looks quite different to us. I guess that if we're going to vote with a religious perspective, it would be one that captures our 7 UU principles. I won't speak for you, but I know that I'm much more interested in how our leaders actually look, standing transparent in the town square, as opposed to how they want to appear, propped up by skin doctors and vapid religious rhetoric in the media spotlight that they don't follow behind the scenes. I really don't care which gods they believe in, or even if they believe in God. Rather, I want to know our leaders believe in the creative, positive forces at work in the universe, and that we all have the power to harness them for the good. If we wish to coax more qualified atheists, humanists, or liberally religious candidates out into the arena who can share this point of view, We'll need to learn how to convince the general populace that these values have universal appeal, even for devout Christians. Candidates have mobilized and are gearing up for big elections in 2020. We need to show up for that fight. When you cast your vote on the next election day, and then the next, and I do hope you will vote, consider in what ways you are voting religiously as a Unitarian Universalist. Then show up to demand fair elections and call out voter suppression to ensure that every voice truly can lift up and sing. Also, ponder your role in preserving freedom of religion, including freedom from religion, because these things are threatened. Be conscious of our continued need to stand sentry at that wall that separates church and state. And please be cautious that as you side with love, you do not become as opinionated, dismissive, or rigidly zealous or overly woke as your opponent. In the voting booth, let's remind religious bullies that the original US motto, chosen by John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, and Thomas Jefferson, is E pluribus unum, of many, one, not in God we trust. Furthermore, on Inauguration Day 2021, let's reassert the fact that the presidential oath of office, the only oath detailed in the Constitution, does not contain the phrase, "So help me God," or any requirement to swear on a Bible. I, for one, would like to see a people's float, not a God's float, a people's float, be decked with peace symbols, flowers, children, cruising down Pennsylvania Avenue with the motto, "It's in our hands, in goodness we trust, free to believe, free not to." In the words of de Tocqueville, America is great because she is good. Yet I don't believe it's because our genius and power resides in pulpits aflame with righteousness like he did. Instead, I'd argue from this pulpit that our genius and power resides in the hearts of our citizenry aflame with freedom, reason, tolerance, and compassion. Anything less would be truly unpatriotic and a god-awful shame. Blessed be, blessed we, bless this country. Let freedom ring.
Hello. In a moment, I'll ask you to join me on Lift Every Voice and Sing. But first, I'd like to share with you the reason why I chose this piece. This song is often referred to as the Black National Anthem. It was written in 1900, so it's 120 years old. And the lyrics really embody the American spirit of always moving forward, always striving for the next best thing, while also honoring the struggle of Black people and people who have faced discrimination, honoring their struggle and their generational fight for more rights. So on a weekend where we are celebrating our nation, I chose this piece to highlight the American spirit that I see in the Black Lives Matter movement, and to commemorate all of the souls that we have lost. I personally, there are a lot of lyrics in here that I, as a trans person, can really resonate, and I'd like to share one line with you right now before we sing. We have come over a way that with tears has been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered, out from the gloomy past, till now we stand at last, where the white gleam of our bright star is cast. Please join me in singing Lift Every Voice and Sing.
every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun, let us march on till victory is won. Stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod, felt in the days when hope unborn had died. Yet with a steady beat have not our weary feet come to the place for which our fathers sighed. We have come over a way that with tears has been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered. Out from the gloomy past till now we stand at last, where the white gleam of our bright star is cast. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, Thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, Thou who stands by Thy might, let us into the light. Keep us forever in the path we pray, lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met Thee, lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget Thee. Shadowed beneath Thy hand, may we forever stand, true to our God, true to our native land.
Each week, whether we're together here in the sanctuary or we're meeting virtually on YouTube, we ask for an offering to support Beacon and our community partners and our justice work in the world, especially now. So we invite you to make an offering, make a contribution on our website. You can go to beaconuu.com and make a secure donation through the Banco application, or send a check to us at our Beacon address in Flagstaff. Either way, we are so appreciative of you sharing your abundance and the spirit of generosity that flows through Beacon, especially in this challenging time. And now we come together usually and we hold hands in our sanctuary. And even though we can't all be here together in this room, I encourage you to feel the sense of that community holding you, holding your hand during this time, as I say this benediction. These are the words of Paul Robeson. He was an African-American singer and activist who was labeled a communist and blacklisted during the McCarthy era in the 1950s. These are his inspiring words. I shall take my voice wherever there are those who want to hear the melody of freedom or the words that might inspire hope and courage in the face of fear. My weapons are peaceful, for it is only through peace that peace can be achieved. The song of freedom must prevail. So may it be through us. Blessed be, blessed we, bless this country, let freedom ring.
We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we'll walk hand in hand someday. We shall all be free. We shall all be free. We shall all be free someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall all be free someday.